Chapter 1. The night everything shattered. The castle kitchen smelled of lemon oil and old stone, scents that had become as familiar to Elena as her own breathing. She worked in silence, her worn hands moving through the motions of polishing silver that would never see daylight. The Thornwood estate didn't entertain guests during the day. Everything here happened after sunset. She'd learned not to ask questions 3 months ago. She'd arrived at these gates with nothing but a battered suitcase and her 4-year-old daughter sleeping against her shoulder. The advertisement had promised room and board, decent wages, and discretion. Elena had needed all three. Her ex-husband's fists had taught her the value of disappearing, and the bruises around her wrists were finally fading to yellow. The housekeeper, Mrs. Calloway, had looked her over with knowing eyes and asked only one question: "Can you keep your mouth shut?" Elena had nodded. She was good at silence. She'd perfected it during her marriage. Now she moved through the castle's lower floors like a ghost, cleaning rooms she'd never seen occupied, preparing meals for an employer she'd glimpsed only twice. Lord Thornwood himself, tall, pale, beautiful in a way that made her throat tight. Both times, he'd passed her in the corridor without acknowledgement, his dark coat billowing behind him like smoke. Mrs. Calloway had been clear: stay in the servants' wing after dark. Keep Lily close, never enter the East Tower. Elena finished the last fork and set it carefully in its velvet-lined drawer. Through the narrow window, she could see the moon rising over the forest, full and white as bone. Somewhere above, she heard footsteps, quick, urgent, wrong. The castle was usually silent as a tomb at this hour. Then she heard the scream, not human. The sound tore through the air like fabric ripping, raw and inhuman and filled with rage. Elena's hands froze on the drawer. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to grab Lily from the nursery and flee into the night, but she'd run before. Running was how she'd ended up here. Another sound followed: breaking glass, a heavy crash, then silence so complete it pressed against her eardrums. Elena found herself moving toward the stairs before she could think better of it. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she climbed, one hand trailing along the cold stone wall. The East Tower. She was walking toward the East Tower. The door stood open, hanging crooked on its hinges. Inside, the circular room looked like a battlefield. Furniture lay shattered, curtains torn from windows that now gaped open to the night. And in the center of the destruction, Lord Thornwood knelt on the floor, one hand pressed to his chest. Blood seeped between his fingers, black in the moonlight. Elena should have run, should have pretended she'd seen nothing. Instead, she stepped through the doorway, her breath catching as his head snapped up. His eyes were red, not bloodshot red, like rubies, like fire, like nothing human had ever possessed. And his face, which she'd thought beautiful from a distance, was terrifying up close. Too perfect, too still. Skin like marble, lips pulled back from teeth that were too sharp to white. Leave. His voice was a rasp, barely controlled. Now. But Elena saw the way his hand trembled against the wound, saw the dark stains spreading across his white shirt. She'd seen enough injuries to recognize when someone was dying, whatever he was, and she was beginning to understand what that might be. He was fading fast. "You're hurt." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "I said leave." He tried to stand and collapsed back to his knees, a sound of pain escaping him that he clearly hadn't meant to make. His red eyes dimmed slightly, the color flickering like a candle about to go out. Elena looked at the windows, at the wreckage, at the way he held himself, like a wounded animal cornered. Someone had attacked him. Someone had tried to kill him in his own home. And despite every survival instinct she'd honed over years of bad marriage and worse mistakes, she crossed the room and knelt beside him. "What do you need?" she asked quietly, his eyes fixed on her, and she saw something flicker in their depths: surprise, perhaps, or confusion. "You should be terrified." "I am." Elena's hands shook as she reached toward him, then stopped, unsure. "But you're bleeding." "Not blood." "Not exactly." He drew a sharp breath, and she saw how his hand had begun to char around the wound, skin turning gray and cracked. "Poison. Silver. I need." He cut himself off, jaw clenching so hard she heard teeth grind. What do you need?" His eyes met hers, and in them she saw centuries of loneliness, of careful control breaking apart. "Blood. Fresh. Freely given." Each word seemed to cost him. "The poison can only be burned out by, but I would never." He was refusing. Even dying, he was refusing to ask. Elena understood refusal. Understood the pride that made you starve rather than beg. She'd worn that same pride like armor when she'd left her husband with nothing. If I said yes, she whispered, would it save you? His expression cracked, something like anguish breaking through. You don't know what you're offering. Then tell me. A blood bond. Temporary. But he swayed, catching himself on one hand. You would be mine, protected under my house, marked. Other vampires would know. And his voice dropped to barely audible. I would taste everything. Your fear, your pain, every wound you carry. Elena thought of Lily sleeping in the nursery. Thought of the bruises finally fading from her skin. Thought of how she'd promised herself she'd never let anyone have power over her again. But she also thought of the way he'd tried to send her away even as he died. The way he'd refused to ask. She'd learned to recognize predators. And whatever else he was, this man kneeling in his own blood wasn't one. How? She asked simply. He stared at her for a long moment, searching her face. Then slowly, he lifted his wrist to his mouth. His fangs, and God, they were real. She could see them clearly now, pierced his own skin. Dark blood welled up, and he offered his wrist to her. 3 drops on your tongue. Then, he gestured weakly to his neck. I do the rest. It will hurt. I'm sorry. Elena took his wrist in both hands. His skin was cold as winter stone, but his pulse beat strong beneath her fingers. She bent her head and let 3 drops fall onto her tongue. They tasted of copper and smoke and something ancient she had no name for. The world tilted. Then his hand was in her hair, gentle despite his desperation, and she felt his lips against her throat. The pain was sharp and immediate, but it didn't last. Within seconds, a strange warmth spread through her veins, and she felt something else: his relief, his gratitude, his carefully controlled desire not to take too much. When he finally pulled back, his eyes had returned to their normal dark brown. The wound on his chest had stopped smoking, the edges already beginning to heal. Thank you, he breathed, and his voice was human again, gentle, devastated. Elena touched her neck and felt 2 small wounds already closing. You're welcome. They knelt there in the ruins of his tower, vampire and human, bound now by blood and choice. While the moon watched through broken windows, and the night held its breath, everything had changed. Neither of them knew yet how much. Chapter 2. The morning after darkness. Elena woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the disorienting realization that she wasn't in her narrow servant's bed. The room around her was vast, decorated in deep burgundies and golds, with furniture that looked centuries old. Her neck throbbed with a dull ache, memory returned in a rush. Blood, fangs, red eyes fading back to brown. She sat up too quickly, and the room spun. Her hand went to her throat, finding 2 small punctures beneath a clean bandage. She didn't remember anyone applying. The wounds felt hot to the touch, as if something still burned beneath her skin. You're awake. Elena's head snapped toward the voice. Lord Thornwood stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the hall's dimmer light. He'd changed clothes now, wearing a simple black shirt and trousers that somehow made him look more dangerous, not less. In the daylight streaming through the windows, his skin held an almost translucent quality, like porcelain stretched over something not quite human. What time is it? Her voice came out hoarse. Nearly noon. You've been asleep for 14 hours. He didn't move from the doorway, keeping a careful distance. I had Mrs. Calloway check on Lily, your daughter, as well. She thinks you're ill and resting. The fact that he knew her daughter's name should have unsettled her. Instead, Elena felt an odd flutter of recognition, as if some part of her already knew things about him she shouldn't. The blood bond. She could feel it now, a thread of awareness connecting them, showing her his careful control, his guilt, his fear of coming closer. You carried me here. It wasn't a question. You fainted after. He paused, jaw tightening. After I fed. I'm sorry. I should have warned you more thoroughly about the effects. Elena swung her legs over the edge of the bed, noting that someone had removed her shoes but left her otherwise dressed. Her head still felt light, but the spinning had stopped. You were dying. There wasn't time for thorough explanations. Nevertheless, he finally stepped into the room, but stopped halfway, as if approaching a skittish animal. You saved my life last night. The silver poisoning would have killed me within the hour. I owe you a debt. That who attacked you? The question stopped him mid-sentence. Something flickered across his face. Surprise again, that same confusion she'd seen when she'd knelt beside him instead of running. What? Someone broke into your home and tried to murder you with silver poison. Elena met his eyes steadily, ignoring the way her pulse jumped at the intensity of his gaze. Who? He stared at her for a long moment, and she felt something shift between them, the realization that she wasn't going to pretend last night hadn't happened. Wasn't going to accept being dismissed back to the servants' quarters with her questions unanswered. She'd bound herself to him. She deserved to know why. House Corvinus, he said, finally, the name heavy with old hatred. A rival vampire house. They've been trying to eliminate me for the better part of a century. Why? Because I refuse to follow their laws. He moved to the window, standing just outside the direct sunlight with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent lifetimes avoiding the sun. The old houses believe vampires should rule humans openly, should take what they want without asking, without consent. I've spent 200 years fighting against that system. Elena processed this, pieces clicking into place. That's why you have human servants. Why? You pay wages. Why? You asked permission before I fed from you. Yes. His hand curled against the window frame. Vampires don't need permission. We're stronger, faster, and we can compel most humans with a thought. But strength doesn't grant rights. I learned that a long time ago. There was a story buried in those words, something painful and old. Elena could feel the edge of it through their bond, a wound that had never quite healed. She stood, steadying herself against the bedpost, and crossed the room to stand beside him. Not close enough to touch, but close enough that he couldn't ignore her presence. They'll come back, she said quietly. Yes, he didn't look at her. Which is why you need to leave. I'll pay you 6 months' wages and arrange transport to anywhere you want to go. Somewhere far from here, where House Corvinus won't think to look. You and Lily will be safe. I'm marked now. Elena touched the bandage on her neck. You said other vampires would know. His jaw clenched. The mark will fade in a few weeks. If you leave now, before anyone sees, is that what you want? The question came out sharper than she'd intended. For me to disappear so you can die alone in your tower the next time they attack? Finally, he turned to look at her, and the raw emotion in his eyes stole her breath. I want you safe. You and your daughter. That's all I've wanted since the moment you walked through that door. Liar. The word hung between them, bold and certain. Elena felt his surprise spike through their bond, followed by something darker, fear that she could read him so easily. You want someone to stay. You're just too noble to ask. Noble. He laughed, bitter and sharp. There's nothing noble about what I am. I'm a monster who drinks blood to survive. Last night, I took from you without I offered. Elena stepped closer, close enough now to see the fine lines of strain around his eyes, the shadows that spoke of sleepless days. I knew what I was doing. You couldn't have. You don't know anything about me. Then tell me. She held his gaze, refusing to look away. You know my name. You know, I have a daughter. You know enough about me to see I'm running from something. So tell me who you are. Your real name, not just Lord Thornwood. He stared at her, something crumbling behind his careful control. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Dorian. My name is Dorian Thornwood. I was turned in 1823 by a vampire who believed in the old ways that humans were cattle, property, food. I've spent 2 centuries trying to prove him wrong, and House Corvinus doesn't like that. House Corvinus wants me dead or compliant. They don't particularly care which. He moved away from the window, pacing like a caged wolf. Last night was their 4th attempt in as many months. They're getting bolder, more desperate. Elena watched him move, feeling the tension coiled in his body through their bond. What happens if they succeed? If they kill you? My house dies with me. The protections I've put in place for my staff, my territory, all of it collapses. House Corvinus moves in and takes control. He stopped pacing, his back to her. And every human in my territory becomes theirs to do with as they please. The weight of it settled over Elena like a shroud. He wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for everyone under his protection. Mrs. Calloway, the groundskeeper, the few other staff she'd glimpsed in her months here. Fighting to keep them safe from a world that saw them as prey. How many people depend on you? She asked. In this castle? 8. In the surrounding territory? He turned back to face her. Nearly 3,000. Small farms, villages, families who've lived here for generations. They don't all know what I am, but they know they're protected. That no one comes into Thornwood lands and hurts them. 3,000 lives balanced on his survival. And he'd been ready to send her away, To face House Corvinus alone, rather than risk her safety, Elena had spent years learning to spot the difference between control and protection. Her ex-husband had called his violence love, his possession protection. But Dorian was offering her escape, offering her wages and safety and freedom, even though keeping her close would give him a better chance of survival. That was the difference. That was everything. I need to see Lily, she said. I need to make sure she's all right. But then she touched the bandage on her neck, feeling the warm pulse of their bond beneath her fingertips. Then you're going to teach me about your world, about house laws and blood oaths and whatever else I need to know. Because I'm not running, Dorian. Not this time. His expression cracked, surprise and relief and fear warring across his features. Elena, someone has to keep you from dying stupidly, she said, managing a small smile despite the fear coiling in her stomach. It might as well be me. For the first time since she'd met him, Dorian Thornwood smiled back. It transformed his face, made him look younger, almost human, almost alive. You're going to be the death of me, he said softly. Not if I can help it. Chapter 3. The things we notice. Elena found Lily in the nursery, playing with wooden blocks under Mrs. Calloway's watchful eye. Her daughter's face lit up when she entered, and Elena felt her heart clench with the familiar mixture of love and protective fear that motherhood had taught her. Mama. Lily launched herself into Elena's arms, nearly knocking her backward. Mrs. Calloway said you were sick. Are you better now? Much better, sweetheart. Elena buried her face in her daughter's dark curls, breathing in the scent of soap and innocence. Over Lily's head, she met Mrs. Calloway's knowing gaze. The older woman's eyes flicked to the bandage on Elena's neck, then back to her face. No surprise showed there, only a grim understanding that made Elena's stomach tighten. How long have you known? Elena asked quietly, once Lily had returned to her blocks. About Lord Thornwood. Mrs. Calloway folded her hands in her lap. 32 years. I came here much like you did, running from a bad situation, desperate for safety. He gave it to me. Never asked for anything in return except discretion and loyalty. And the others? Most don't know, don't need to. They work during daylight hours, go home before sunset, live their lives without ever seeing him. Mrs. Calloway's expression softened. But those of us who stay, who see, we know what we're protecting. And who's protecting us? Elena touched her neck unconsciously. Last night, I know. I cleaned up the tower this morning. The housekeeper's voice dropped lower. House Corvinus is getting aggressive. This won't be the last attack, he told me. Elena watched Lily stack blocks into a tower, knock them down, start again. The simple joy of destruction and rebuilding. He wanted me to leave. Of course he did. That's his way. Mrs. Calloway stood, smoothing her apron. But you're marked now. Whether you stay or go, you're part of this house. You might as well understand what that means. After lunch with Lily, Elena returned to Dorian's study as he'd instructed. The room was on the castle's north side, where thick curtains could block out the sun. He'd lit oil lamps instead, casting everything in warm amber light that softened the harsh lines of ancient furniture and older books. Dorian stood at a table covered in maps and papers. His shirt sleeves rolled up in a gesture so casually human it startled her. Then she noticed how still he stood, no fidgeting, no unconscious shifts of weight. Perfectly, unnaturally motionless. You don't breathe, she said. Before she could stop herself, he looked up, catching her staring. A hint of something embarrassment crossed his face. I can. It's habit mostly. Useful for speaking. But no, I don't need to, he demonstrated, going completely still for a long moment. No rise and fall of chest, no pulse visible at his throat. A statue carved from flesh. Then he breathed in a conscious decision, and the illusion of humanity returned. And settling? A little, Elena admitted, moving into the room. What else should I notice? The question seemed to surprise him. He gestured to a chair across from his desk, waiting until she sat before settling into his own seat with that same unnatural grace. Most humans don't ask. They prefer not to know. I'm not most humans. Elena met his eyes steadily. You said the bond lets you taste my emotions. Does it work both ways? To a lesser degree. You'll sense strong feelings, danger, proximity. He paused. And you'll know when I'm hungry. Are you, now? No, last night was. He cut himself off, jaw tightening. I took more than I should have. I won't need to feed again for several weeks. Elena processed this, filing it away with the other strange truths of her new reality. Show me what you were working on. Dorian studied her for a moment, then turned the map to face her. Thornwood territory. Everything within these borders is under my protection. House Corvinus controls the land to the east and south, nearly 10 times my holdings, but they haven't taken yours. Can't. Not while I'm alive. Vampire law is absolute about territorial rights. They can challenge me, try to kill me, but they can't simply invade. His finger traced the border between territories, which is why they're using poison and ambush instead of open warfare. Elena leaned forward, studying the map. Several locations were marked with red X's. What are these? Attacks over the past 6 months. 3 on the border villages, 1 on a farmstead, 2 here at the castle. His voice remained steady, but she felt the anger simmering beneath through their bond. They're testing my defenses, looking for weaknesses, and they found one. You, alone in your tower. Yes, he met her eyes. They'll come again, probably with more hunters this time. Silver weapons, possibly fire. They'll try during the day, when I'm weaker. Weaker how? Sunlight doesn't kill immediately like the stories say, but it burns, drains strength, clouds thinking. A vampire caught in direct sunlight is vulnerable. He rolled down his sleeve, and Elena noticed faint scars on his wrist, old burns, long healed. I've made that mistake before. Elena filed away each piece of information, building a picture of the rules that governed his world. What about the other things? Crosses, holy water, garlic? A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Folklore. Though I'll admit garlic is unpleasant, the smell is overwhelming to vampire senses. As for crosses, he pulled a chain from beneath his shirt, revealing a simple silver crucifix. I was Catholic in life. Death didn't change my faith, only complicated it. The admission was so quietly vulnerable that Elena felt something shift in her chest. She'd expected a monster, and found a man who still prayed despite being damned by the very religion he believed in. I don't think you're damned, she said softly, his hand closed around the cross. You don't know what I've done, then tell me. Elena, you know my secrets. I can feel you knowing them. She touched her neck, feeling the bond pulse warm beneath her fingers. You tasted my fear, my pain, everything I've survived. It's only fair I know yours. Dorian stood abruptly, moving to the window, though he didn't open the curtains. When he spoke, his voice was distant, lost in memory. I killed my maker, the vampire who turned me, who believed humans were nothing more than food. I drove a stake through his heart while he slept. Elena waited, sensing there was more. It was justified under vampire law. He'd broken our most sacred rule. He'd turned me without my consent, stolen my humanity without asking. Dorian's reflection in the dark window looked haunted. But he was also my sire, bound to me by blood and law. Killing him made me an outcast among the old houses. They see me as a traitor to our kind, because you think humans deserve rights, because I know they do. He turned back to face her. I was human once. I remember what it felt like to be powerless, to be prey. I won't inflict that on others, no matter what my nature demands. Elena stood, crossing to where he stood. This close, she could see the weight he carried, centuries of fighting alone against a world that hated him for his mercy. You're not alone anymore. Elena, you don't understand what you're offering. I'm offering what you gave me. Protection, partnership. She held his gaze. You asked if I was afraid earlier. I am. But not of you. You should be. His voice dropped to a whisper. The bond makes you vulnerable to me in ways you can't imagine. I could compel you, control you, make you want, but you won't. Elena said it with certainty, feeling the truth of it through their connection. That's not who you are. He stared at her, something breaking in his expression. How can you be so sure? Because you're still trying to send me away. She smiled slightly. A monster wouldn't care if I stayed or left. A monster would use the bond to keep me here. You're doing the opposite. Dorian closed his eyes, and she felt the war raging inside him, the desperate desire for companionship fighting against his bone-deep fear of causing harm. When he opened them again, they held a resignation that felt like surrender. If you stay, I'll teach you everything. How to recognize other vampires, how to navigate house politics, how to protect yourself. His hand lifted, almost touching her face before dropping away. But Elena, if you change your mind, if this becomes too much, promise me you'll tell me. Promise me you'll leave. I promise. She knew it was a lie even as she said it. She'd already decided to stay, had made that choice the moment she'd let 3 drops of his blood touch her tongue. They both knew it, but sometimes Lies were what people needed to hear to accept the truth they couldn't change. Then we begin tomorrow, Dorian said quietly. Tonight, rest, recover, spend time with Lily. Because once we start, everything becomes more dangerous. Elena nodded and turned to leave. At the door, she paused. Dorian, thank you for telling me the truth. His smile was sad and ancient and unbearably human. Thank you for asking. Chapter 4. Lessons in the dark. The lessons began at dusk, when the sun finally released its hold on the castle, and Dorian could move through the halls without pain. Elena had put Lily to bed early, kissing her daughter's forehead and promising she'd be nearby if needed. Mrs. Calloway had agreed to listen for any cries, her expression knowing and slightly worried. Now Elena stood in the castle's great hall, watching Dorian light candles with methodical precision. The flames cast dancing shadows across stone walls that had witnessed centuries of secrets. First rule, Dorian said, not turning from his task. Never invite a vampire into your home unless you trust them with your life. The invitation creates a threshold bond they can enter freely from that moment forward, even if you change your mind. What about this castle? Elena asked. I didn't invite anyone. This is my home, my territory. Different rules apply. He finally turned to face her, and in the candlelight his features looked softer, almost mortal. But if you establish your own residence, your own sanctuary, guard those invitations carefully. Elena filed this away, understanding the weight beneath his words. In her old life, she'd let her husband move into her apartment, had signed the lease over to him when he'd asked. She'd given away her sanctuary without understanding the cost. Second rule, Dorian continued, moving closer. Vampire senses are heightened. We hear heartbeats from across a room, smell fear and sweat, taste lies in the air. When dealing with vampires, assume they know more about your emotional state than you do. Like, you know, I'm nervous right now. A slight smile touched his lips. I don't need vampire senses to see that. Your pulse is visible at your throat, and you're standing like you're ready to run. He stopped several feet away, giving her space. But yes, I can also hear your heart racing. Elena forced herself to relax, to breathe steadily. How do I hide it? You don't. Trying to hide fear from a vampire is like trying to hide blood in water. We're built to detect it. He tilted his head, studying her. Better to acknowledge it, own it. Fear isn't weakness, Elena. It's intelligence. Is that what you tell yourself when House Corvinus attacks? The question was bold, probably too bold, but Dorian's smile widened slightly. Touch. Yes. I'm afraid of them, of what they represent, of failing the people who depend on me. He moved to a table lined with various objects: a wooden stake, a silver knife, a vial of clear liquid, a heavy chain. Which brings us to lesson 3. Know your weapons. Elena approached the table carefully. Silver hurts you. I saw that. Silver disrupts our healing, poisons our blood. A silver blade can kill if it reaches the heart or severs the spine. He picked up the wooden stake, turning it in his hands. Wood through the heart is more reliable. It stops us immediately, turns us to ash within minutes. But it has to be precise. Miss the heart by an inch, and you've only made a vampire very, very angry. What about beheading? Effective, but messy. We're stronger than humans, faster. Getting close enough to behead a vampire means getting close enough to be killed. He set down the stake and lifted the vial. This is holy water. Useless unless blessed by genuine faith, and even then it only burns like acid. Painful, not fatal. Elena reached for the chain, and Dorian's hand shot out, stopping her just before she touched it. His fingers wrapped around her wrist with gentle firmness, his skin cool against hers. Careful. That's iron, wound with vervain, a plant that weakens vampires on contact. It won't hurt you. But some vampire hunters coat their weapons with our weaknesses. He released her wrist slowly, and she felt the ghost of his touch lingering. Never assume a weapon is safe. How do you know all this? If these things hurt you, experience. His voice went flat. I've been hurt by all of them at one point or another. You learn quickly, or you die. Elena studied his face, seeing the truth of old wounds hidden beneath his careful control. Show me. What? Show me how fast you are. How strong. I need to understand what I'm dealing with. If House Corvinus attacks again. She stepped back, giving him room. I can't protect you if I don't know what you're capable of. Something flickered in his expression: surprise, hesitation, and beneath it a fear she felt echo through their bond. He was afraid of scaring her, afraid of being seen as the monster he claimed to be. Please, Elena added softly. I need to see. Dorian held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded. He moved to the far end of the hall, perhaps 30 feet away. Don't blink. Elena kept her eyes fixed on him. 1 second he stood at the far wall. The next, he was beside her, so close she felt the displaced air against her skin. She hadn't seen him move, he'd simply been there and then here, faster than her eyes could track. Her heart hammered, but she didn't step back. Again. This time he moved around her in a circle, appearing at 4 different points so quickly it looked like there were multiple versions of him. Then he was in front of her again, perfectly still, not even breathing hard. Strength, he said quietly, and reached past her to the heavy oak table. He lifted it one-handed, holding the solid wood and its contents aloft as easily as Elena might lift a book. The muscles in his forearm didn't even strain. He set it down without a sound. And this, he continued, his voice dropping lower, is compulsion. His eyes met hers, and Elena felt something press against her mind, not painful, but insistent, like a voice whispering instructions she couldn't quite hear. Part of her wanted to step closer, wanted to offer her throat, wanted to. The pressure vanished. Dorian had looked away, his jaw clenched tight. That's what other vampires can do. What I could do if I chose. His hands curled into fists at his sides. The bond makes you more resistant to me, but not immune. Never immune. Elena's breath came faster, but not entirely from fear. She'd felt his restraint in that moment, the careful control he'd exerted to pull back before the compulsion took hold. You stopped. Of course I stopped. He sounded almost angry. I would never, I know. Elena stepped closer, drawn by something she couldn't name. That's why I'm not afraid. You should be. Elena, I could make you do anything. Make you feel anything. Make you believe. He cut himself off, turning away sharply. This was a mistake. You should go. No, she caught his arm, feeling the tension coiled beneath his skin. Through their bond, she felt his control fracturing, felt the loneliness and desire he'd kept locked away for decades, threatening to break free. You're trying to scare me away again. Because you're standing too close. His voice was strained. Because I can hear your pulse and smell your skin, and every instinct I have is telling me to. He stopped, breathing hard despite not needing to. Please, go. Elena should have listened, should have recognized the danger. But she'd spent years letting fear control her choices, and she was tired of running. What are you afraid of? She whispered. He finally looked at her, and the raw hunger in his eyes stole her breath. That I'll hurt you. That I'll take too much. That I'll become exactly what House Corvinus believes I am, a monster who preys on the helpless. I'm not helpless. Elena held his gaze. And you're not a monster. You're a man who's been alone too long, fighting too hard, carrying too much. She felt the truth of it through their bond, felt his desperate need for connection warring against his fear of causing harm. Let me help carry it. You don't know what you're asking. Then tell me. Stop protecting me from the truth and tell me what you need. The question hung between them, heavy with implications neither was ready to voice. Dorian stared at her, something crumbling in his expression, and Elena felt the exact moment his control slipped. I need, his voice broke. God help me. I need someone to see me as more than a monster or a martyr. I need someone who knows what I am and stays anyway. His hand lifted, trembling, and touched her cheek with infinite gentleness. I need you to stop looking at me like I'm worth saving. What if you are? Elena, the crash of breaking glass cut through the moment. Dorian's head snapped toward the sound, his entire body going taut. Elena felt alarm spike through their bond, sharp and immediate. Stay behind me, he ordered, and his voice had changed, colder, harder, deadly. This was the predator, the warrior who'd survived 2 centuries of vampire politics. Another crash, closer this time. Then voices, low and mocking, drifting through the halls. Little Thornwood, someone called. The words, dripping with contempt. We've come to finish what we started. House Corvinus had returned, and this time, they'd brought an army. Chapter 5. When shadows strike, Dorian moved with lethal precision, positioning himself between Elena and the hall's entrance. His entire demeanor had transformed, the gentle teacher replaced by something ancient and dangerous. Elena's hands shook, but she forced herself to stay calm, to think. How many? She whispered. 4, maybe 5. His eyes had begun to shift, darkening toward that inhuman red. They're spreading through the castle, trying to corner me. Lily, north wing, opposite direction. Mrs. Calloway will have secured the servants' quarters by now. They're safe. He glanced back at her, and she saw the war in his expression, the need to protect her fighting against the knowledge that sending her away would leave him vulnerable. There's a passage behind the tapestry. It leads to I'm not leaving you. Elena, this isn't a discussion, you're right. It's not. She grabbed the silver knife from the table, ignoring how her pulse hammered in her throat. You said the bond makes me part of this house. That means I fight for it. Dorian stared at her, something between terror and admiration flashing across his face. Then footsteps echoed in the corridor, slow, deliberate, meant to intimidate. No time, he muttered. Stay close. Don't try to be a hero. If I tell you to run, you run. Understood? Elena nodded, even though they both knew she was lying. The first vampire entered through the main doors, a woman with silver blonde hair and eyes like chips of ice. She wore modern clothes, designer labels that looked wrong in the medieval hall, and her smile was all teeth. Dorian Thornwood. Still playing house with your little pets? Her gaze slid to Elena, dismissive and amused. Is this the human who helped you? How quaint. Celeste. Dorian's voice was granite. House Corvinus violates the territorial accords by bringing hunters into my home. Lord Corvinus will answer to the Night Court for this. Will he? Celeste laughed, cold and bright. The Night Court cares little for traitors who coddle humans. Besides, by the time they convene, you'll be ash and your territory will be ours. Two more vampires emerged from side passages, both male, both radiating the same casual cruelty. Elena recognized the predatory grace, the unnatural stillness between movements. They circled slowly, cutting off escape routes. 3 against 1, Dorian said calmly. Hardly sporting. Oh, we're not alone, Celeste gestured, and 2 more figures stepped from the shadows, human, but their eyes held a glazed, empty quality that made Elena's stomach turn. Thralls, she realized. Humans under compulsion, their wills completely subjugated. Using thralls is forbidden, Dorian snarled, and Elena felt his rage surge through their bond like fire. So is killing one's sire. Yet here you stand. Celeste's smile widened. The rules change when dealing with outcasts, Thornwood. Haven't you learned that by now? The attack came without warning. The 2 male vampires blurred forward while the thralls moved to flank. Dorian met them with inhuman speed, catching the first vampire's strike and using his momentum to throw him into a stone pillar. The crack of impact echoed through the hall, but the second vampire was already there, silver blade flashing. Dorian twisted away, but not fast enough. The blade scored across his ribs, and Elena felt the burning pain echo through their bond. She bit back a cry, tightening her grip on her own knife. One of the thralls lunged at her, moving with unnatural coordination. Elena ducked under his grasp, years of surviving her ex-husband's attacks giving her instincts she'd never wanted. She slashed with the silver blade, catching the thrall's arm. He didn't even flinch, blood running down his skin as he advanced again. Elena. Dorian's shout was desperate. He'd engaged both male vampires, moving too fast for her to follow, but Celeste had started toward Elena with that same cruel smile. The little pet has teeth, Celeste purred. How delicious. I wonder what you taste like. Elena backed toward the table of weapons, her mind racing. The thrall was between her and Celeste, still advancing with that horrible empty stare. Behind her, she heard the crash of bodies, Dorian's grunt of pain as another silver blade found its mark. Her hand closed on the vial of holy water. I wouldn't, Celeste warned. That will only make me angry. Elena threw it anyway. The vial shattered against Celeste's chest, and the vampire shrieked a sound so inhuman it raised every hair on Elena's body. Steam rose from Celeste's skin where the blessed water burned, eating through fabric and flesh like acid. The distraction lasted only seconds, but it was enough. Dorian broke free from his attackers, moving with devastating efficiency. He caught one vampire from behind, driving a wooden stake through his back and into his heart with brutal precision. The vampire's scream cut off as his body began to crumble, turning to ash that scattered across the ancient stones, but the other male vampire had circled around. Elena saw the silver blade in his hand, saw him aim for Dorian's exposed back. She didn't think, just moved. Elena threw herself forward, driving her own silver knife into the vampire's side. It wasn't a killing blow, she'd missed the heart, but silver in the wound made him stumble, made him howl. It was enough for Dorian to spin and catch the vampire's throat in one hand. Touch her again and I'll make your death last days, Dorian growled, and his voice was nothing human. His eyes blazed red, fangs fully extended. And for the first time, Elena saw him as House Corvinus must see him, a weapon. Deadly and merciless, he snapped the vampire's neck with one efficient twist and drove the stake home before the body hit the floor, to down. But Celeste and the thralls remained. The blonde vampire had recovered from the holy water, her face a mask of burnt flesh that was already beginning to heal. She looked at the ashes of her companions, then at Dorian and Elena, and her expression shifted from amusement to cold calculation. Interesting, she said softly. The human fights for you, saves you. And you, her gaze fixed on Dorian. You nearly lost control when she was threatened. The bond runs deeper than we thought. Leave now, and I'll let you carry that message to Corvinus, Dorian said, placing himself between Elena and the threat. Stay and join your brothers in ash. Celeste studied them for a long moment, weighing odds. Elena could see the calculation in her eyes, 2 of her party dead, Dorian still standing despite his wounds, and a human who'd proven more dangerous than expected. This isn't over, Celeste finally said. She gestured to the thralls, who immediately moved to her side like puppets on strings. Lord Corvinus wants your territory, Thornwood. He'll have it, one way or another. And your little pet? Her smile returned, vicious and promising. She just made herself a target. Then you'll have to go through me first. That's the plan. Celeste backed toward the door, dragging the thralls with her. Sleep well, Dorian. What little time you have left. She vanished into the night, taking the compelled humans with her. The silence that followed felt deafening. Dorian swayed, catching himself against a pillar. The silver wounds across his ribs and shoulder were bleeding black, the flesh around them turning gray. Elena dropped her knife and rushed to his side. I'm all right, he said, but his voice was strained. It's not, you're poisoned again. Elena's hands hovered over the wounds, afraid to touch and cause more pain. Dorian, you need blood. I'll heal. It just takes longer with silver. He tried to straighten and nearly collapsed. Elena caught him, shocked by how heavy he was despite looking so lean. Muscle and bone made from something denser than human flesh. Don't be stupid. She guided him to a chair, her mind racing through everything he'd taught her. You said fresh blood burns out poison. You need to feed. Not from you. Not again so soon. But she could feel his hunger through the bond now, sharp and desperate. The fight had drained him, and the silver was spreading through his system like fire. How long before the poison kills you? He met her eyes, and she saw the answer there. Hours, maybe less. Then we don't have a choice. Elena pulled back her hair, exposing her neck. The bite marks from before had healed to small scars, but she could still feel their phantom ache. Do it. Elena, you took a blade for me. Let me return the favor. She knelt beside his chair, putting herself at the right height. Besides, someone has to keep you alive long enough to be properly irritated with me. Despite everything, Dorian laughed, a rough, pained sound. You're going to be insufferable about this, aren't you? Absolutely. Elena touched his face, feeling the fever heat of silver poisoning beneath his skin. Now stop arguing and let me save your life again. His hand came up to cradle the back of her head, gentle despite his desperation. This is becoming a dangerous habit. Good thing I like danger. Elena felt his lips against her throat, felt the sharp pierce of fangs, and then the world dissolved into heat and connection. Through the bond, she felt his gratitude, his guilt, his carefully controlled hunger, and beneath it all, something deeper. Something that felt dangerously like devotion. When he finally pulled away, his eyes had returned to brown, and the wounds had stopped smoking. Thank you, he whispered against her skin. Elena leaned into him, exhausted and exhilarated and terrified of what they'd just survived. We need a better plan. We do. Dorian's arms came around her, holding her steady. Because Celeste was right. This isn't over. Then we end it. Elena pulled back to meet his eyes. Together, in the candlelight, surrounded by ash and blood and broken glass, they made their silent promise. Whatever came next, they would face it side by side. Chapter 6. The weight of ancient blood. Dawn broke gray and cold over Thornwood Castle. Elena sat in Dorian's study, wrapped in a blanket that still smelled of old leather and candle wax, watching him pace before the windows. He'd pulled the heavy curtains closed against the rising sun, but thin lines of light leaked through the gaps, making him flinch whenever he passed too close. You should be resting, he said, for the third time, not looking at her. So should you. Elena's neck throbbed where he'd fed, but the wounds had already begun to heal. The blood bond strengthened with each exchange, and she could feel him now even across the room, his exhaustion, his worry, the guilt that gnawed at him like acid. I don't sleep the way humans do. Not during the day. He finally stopped pacing, leaning heavily against his desk. In the dim light, he looked haggard, the shadows under his eyes darker than usual. I enter a kind of death sleep, vulnerable, unconscious, which is why House Corvinus prefers daytime attacks. Elena absorbed this, adding it to her growing understanding of his world. That's why you wanted me to leave. You knew you couldn't protect me during the day. Can't even protect myself. His laugh was bitter. 2 centuries of fighting, and I'm still just a target waiting for silver. Stop. Elena stood, letting the blanket fall, and crossed to him. You killed 2 of them last night. Sent the 3rd running. That's not weakness. I nearly got you killed. His hands gripped the desk edge so hard the wood cracked. When that vampire went for you, he cut himself off, jaw clenching. I lost control. If you hadn't moved when you did, but I did. We protected each other. Elena touched his arm, feeling the tension coiled beneath his skin. That's what partners do. Partners. He said the word like it was foreign, strange. Elena, you don't understand what you've become. The blood bond. It's not just about protection. Every vampire in the territory can sense it now. They know you're mine. The possessive pronoun sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. Yours? Marked? Claimed? Under my protection. According to house law. He finally looked at her, and his eyes held something raw and desperate. Which means House Corvinus won't stop with me. They'll come for you. For Lily. They'll use you as leverage, as bait, as his voice cracked. I've made you a target. Elena heard the words beneath his words, felt the terror bleeding through their bond. He was already imagining the worst, already blaming himself for dangers that hadn't happened yet. Then teach me to fight them, she said firmly. Really? Fight. Not just survive an attack, but win. You're human. Against vampires, so are vampire hunters, and they've been killing your kind for centuries. Elena held his gaze. You have weapons, knowledge, 200 years of survival. Share it with me. Dorian stared at her, something shifting in his expression. She felt it through the bond the moment he stopped seeing her as someone to protect and started seeing her as an ally. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. If I do this, he said slowly, you follow my instructions exactly. No improvisation. No heroics, like throwing holy water at a vampire's face. Despite everything, his lips twitched. That was actually brilliant. Reckless, but brilliant. He straightened, and she saw him shift into teacher mode, putting aside his fear to give her what she needed. First, we need to establish what resources we have. Mrs. Calloway runs the household, but she also coordinates our information network. Every servant, every farmhand in the territory reports anything unusual. A spy network, an early warning system. It's kept me alive this long. He moved to a cabinet, pulling out papers covered in neat handwriting. These are reports from the last week. Strange travelers in the villages, livestock killed and drained, humans found with bite marks they don't remember receiving. Elena scanned the documents, her stomach sinking. There are so many. House Corvinus has been preparing for this assault for months. Planting thralls, mapping my defenses, identifying weaknesses. He pulled out a map, spreading it across the desk. They're not just trying to kill me anymore. They're staging an invasion. How many vampires does Corvinus have? In his house? 30, maybe 40, plus countless thralls. Dorian's finger traced the border of his territory. I have myself, 3 allies who visit occasionally, and a handful of humans who know what I am and choose to help. We're outnumbered 10 to 1. The odds were impossible. Elena felt the weight of them settling over her shoulders like a shroud. Then why haven't they just overwhelmed you already? Vampire law. The Night Court arbitrates disputes between houses, and they're strict about territorial rights. Corvinus can challenge me, send assassins, arrange accidents, but if he stages an open invasion, other houses will see him as a threat and unite against him. Dorian met her eyes. He's betting that if he kills me quietly enough, he can claim my territory before anyone notices. So we need to make noise. Elena's mind raced, grasping at possibilities. Make it impossible for him to hide what he's doing, and risk drawing the Night Court's attention to me. An outcast, a sire killer. He shook his head. They're as likely to execute me as help me. What if you weren't an outcast? The idea formed as she spoke. What if you had allies? Other houses who disagreed with Corvinus's methods. There aren't any. The old houses believe in the traditional ways: human subjugation, vampire supremacy. I'm an aberration to them. But you killed your sire because he broke vampire law. He turned you without consent. Elena leaned over the map, her finger finding the markers for other territories. Surely some vampires value that law. Value consent. Dorian went very still. There are rumors. Younger vampires, turned in the last century, who question the old ways. But they keep silent, afraid of being branded traitors. What if they had someone to rally behind? Someone who'd already proven that standing against the old ways was possible. Elena looked up at him. You're not just fighting for your territory, Dorian. You're fighting for a different kind of vampire society. That has to mean something to someone. He stared at her like she'd spoken in a foreign language. You want me to start a revolution? I want you to stop fighting alone. She touched his hand, feeling the cold of his skin. You've been surviving for 2 centuries. Maybe it's time to actually live. The words hung between them, heavy with implications. Through the bond, Elena felt something crack in him, the armor he'd worn for so long finally breaking under the weight of hope he'd stopped letting himself feel. I wouldn't know how, he admitted quietly. To live, I mean. I've spent so long just enduring. Then we'll figure it out together. Elena squeezed his hand. But first, we need to survive the next attack. What else can you teach me? Dorian was quiet for a long moment, studying their joined hands. When he spoke again, his voice was steadier. Vampires have weaknesses beyond silver and wood. We're territorial, we can't enter a home without invitation. We're creatures of habit, most of us have patterns, places we return to. And we're proud. He met her eyes. That pride is often our downfall. How do we use that? By making Corvinus overconfident. By letting him think he's winning right up until the moment we strike. A dangerous smile touched Dorian's lips. You said you wanted to fight. Are you willing to be bait? Elena's heart hammered, but she didn't look away. What did you have in mind? House Corvinus thinks you're my weakness. A human I've bound myself to, making me vulnerable. He turned their hands over, his thumb tracing the pulse at her wrist. What if we let them think they're right? Let them come for you, thinking I'll be distracted, desperate, easy to kill, while you're actually setting a trap. While we're setting a trap, he released her hand, and she felt the loss of his touch like cold water. But Elena, it will be dangerous, genuinely dangerous. If anything goes wrong, then you'll save me, like you've been doing since the night we met. She smiled, trying for confidence she didn't quite feel. Besides, I'm getting good at stabbing vampires. I might surprise you. You already do. Constantly, his expression softened, and for a moment he looked young, almost human. I've spent 200 years alone, Elena. I'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone fight beside me. Get used to it. Elena moved back to the map, studying the territories with new eyes. Now show me where Corvinus is most likely to strike next. And teach me everything you know about vampire pride. As dawnlight grew stronger outside the curtained windows, they bent over the map together, planning their war. Dorian spoke of old feuds and ancient grudges, of vampire politics and blood oaths, of the intricate web of power that governed the immortal world, and Elena listened, absorbing every detail, every weakness, every possibility. She was human in a world of monsters, mortal in a realm of immortals. But she had something Corvinus didn't expect. She had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. By the time exhaustion finally claimed her, the sun high and merciless outside, Elena had begun to see the shape of their strategy. It was dangerous, possibly suicidal, but it was also their best chance. Dorian carried her to bed, his touch gentle despite his strength. Sleep, he murmured. I'll watch over you. You need to rest too, Elena mumbled, already drifting. I will. Soon. She felt his cool fingers brush hair from her face. Thank you, Elena, for staying, for fighting, for making me believe that survival might not be enough. She wanted to answer, but darkness pulled her under. Her last conscious thought was of his hand in hers, cold and steady and real. When she woke, everything would change, but for now, in the gray light of morning, they had each other. It would have to be enough. Chapter 7. Blood and Revelation. Elena woke to darkness and the sound of rain against windows. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was then. Memory flooded back with the throb of her pulse against healing bite marks. The attack, the planning, Dorian carrying her to bed while dawn broke outside. She sat up, finding herself in the same guest room as before, still fully dressed. Someone had draped a blanket over her, left a glass of water on the nightstand. Through the bond, she felt Dorian nearby, awake and restless. The clock on the mantel read 9 p.m. She'd slept for nearly 12 hours. Elena found him in the castle's library, surrounded by books that looked older than countries. He stood at the window, watching rain streak down glass, and didn't turn when she entered. But she felt his awareness of her through the bond, warm and immediate. "You should have woken me," she said. "You needed rest." The blood loss he cut himself off, his reflection in the dark window showing strain. "I took too much." Again, I offered. Again. Elena crossed to him, studying his profile in the lamplight. He'd changed clothes, were all black now, like he was preparing for war. "Have you slept at all?" "Some. Enough." He finally looked at her, and his eyes held shadows that had nothing to do with exhaustion. "Mrs. Calloway reported 3 more thrall sightings in the villages. Corvinus is positioning his pieces. How long before he moves?" "Days, maybe hours." Dorian gestured to the books spread across a nearby table. "I've been researching blood bonds, looking for something we can use. There are rituals, old magic, that might strengthen our connection, make you harder to compel or kill." Elena moved to the table, scanning leather-bound volumes written in languages she couldn't read. "What kind of rituals?" "Blood oaths, binding ceremonies, ancient pacts that tie a vampire to a human so completely that harming one harms both." His voice went quiet. "They're considered archaic now, too permanent, too intimate." Something in his tone made her look up. "Intimate how?" Dorian met her eyes and she felt heat flush through the bond, his carefully controlled desire, his fear of wanting too much. The deepest bonds require exchange, not just blood, but emotion, memory, trust. He looked away. "Everything that makes you who you are would be open to me, and everything I am would be open to you. No secrets, no shields." The thought should have terrified her. Instead, Elena felt a strange pull toward it, toward the idea of truly knowing him. Would it work? Would it protect me from Corvinus? Yes. A vampire trying to harm someone bound to another through blood oath would be violating sacred law. Even the Night Court would have to intervene. He closed the book he'd been reading. "But Elena, you can't unknow what you'd learn about me. 200 years of memories, of kills, of darkness, it would all be yours to witness. You've already tasted my darkness. My fear, my pain, my failed marriage." Elena touched the book's cover, feeling ancient leather beneath her fingers. "Turnabout seems fair. There's nothing fair about exposing you to what I've done." His hands gripped the table's edge. "I've killed Elena, not just in self-defense. I've hunted criminals, predators, humans who hurt others, and I've ended them. Justified it as justice, but it was still murder. Did they deserve it? Does anyone deserve death?" He laughed bitterly. "I don't know anymore. I just know I couldn't stand by and watch them hurt the innocent. So I became judge, jury, and executioner." He turned to face her fully. "That's what you'd be binding yourself to, not a hero. A killer who happens to have scruples." Elena studied him, this man who'd spent 2 centuries fighting alone, trying to prove he was more than the monster his nature demanded. She thought of her ex-husband, who'd claimed to love her while his fists taught her fear. Thought of the difference between violence that protected and violence that controlled. "Show me," she said quietly. "What? The ritual? Show me how it's done." She held his gaze. "If we're going to survive Corvinus, I need to be more than just marked. I need to be yours in a way that vampire law can't ignore." "Elena, you said yourself, days or hours until he attacks. We don't have time for doubt." She moved closer, close enough to feel the cold radiating from his skin. "I trust you, Dorian. Now trust me." Something cracked in his expression, centuries of loneliness breaking against the shore of her certainty. "You'll see everything. Things I've never told anyone. Things I'm ashamed of. Good. I want to know all of you, not just the parts you think are acceptable." Elena touched his chest, feeling the stillness where a heartbeat should be. "Besides, you've already seen my worst moments. The bruises, the fear, the nights I almost went back to him because I didn't think I could survive alone." She met his eyes. "We're both survivors, Dorian. Both broken in ways that don't heal. Maybe that's enough." He stared at her for a long moment, then reached up to cover her hand with his own. "The ritual requires preparation, sacred space, specific words," and he hesitated. "Complete honesty. If either of us holds back, the bond won't form properly." "Then we don't hold back." Elena felt her pulse quicken, but not from fear. What do we need? Dorian pulled a book from the stack, opening it to a page marked with faded ribbon. The text was in Latin, but sketches showed two figures kneeling face to face, hands joined, surrounded by candles. An unbroken circle, offerings of blood from both parties, and truth spoken aloud: our fears, our desires, our intentions. When? Tonight? Now, if you're certain. His thumb traced circles on her hand, unconscious and gentle. But Elena, once we do this, there's no going back. We'll be bound until death, mine or yours. She thought of Lily sleeping safely in the nursery, protected by Mrs. Calloway and locks Dorian had reinforced with iron and blessing. Thought of the servants who'd stayed despite knowing what their employer was, because he'd given them safety when the world outside had not. Thought of 3,000 people living under Thornwood protection, unaware that one man's death would leave them exposed to horrors they couldn't imagine. And she thought of Dorian himself, ancient and lonely and so carefully controlled, trying desperately to be good in a world that rewarded cruelty. I'm certain, she said. He closed his eyes, something like relief washing through the bond. Then we begin. The next hour passed in preparation. Dorian cleared the library's center, creating a circle of salt and silver that gleamed in lamplight. He lit candles at the cardinal points, speaking words in Latin that made the air feel heavier, charged with old magic. Elena watched him work, seeing the reverence in his movements, the way his hands trembled slightly as he placed the final candle. This is sacred, he said quietly, not looking at her. Even among vampires, blood oaths are rare. Special. It means he stopped, jaw clenching. What? It means you'll be mine, and I'll be yours, in ways that go beyond protection or territory. He finally met her eyes. It means I won't be able to lie to you, won't be able to hide what I feel. And Elena, what I feel. His voice dropped to barely audible. It terrifies me. Elena's breath caught. Through the bond, she felt his desire, his need, the carefully controlled longing he'd been fighting since the night she'd knelt beside him and offered her blood. But beneath it, deeper and more frightening, she felt something else, the beginning of love, fragile and new and absolutely certain. I'm terrified too, she whispered, but I'm also tired of being afraid. Dorian nodded slowly, then gestured to the circle. Kneel, facing me. Don't break the salt line. Elena stepped carefully over the boundary, settling onto her knees in the circle's center. Dorian knelt across from her, close enough that their knees almost touched. The candles cast dancing shadows across his face, making him look otherworldly, beautiful, and dangerous in equal measure. Your hands, he said softly. She placed her hands in his, palm to palm, and felt electricity arc between them. His skin was cold, but his grip was steady, anchoring her. The ritual requires blood and truth, Dorian began, his voice taking on a formal cadence. I'll cut our palms, press them together. Then we speak our intentions aloud, why we're doing this, what we want from the bond, what we fear most. His eyes searched hers. Everything, Elena. No lies, no omissions. I understand. He produced a silver knife, and Elena felt him flinch as he drew it across his own palm. Dark blood welled up, and then he was pressing the blade to her hand, a quick, sharp sting. Their palms came together, blood mixing, and the world seemed to tilt. Heat flooded through Elena's veins, and suddenly she could feel him, not just his emotions, but his memories, his thoughts, the weight of 2 centuries pressing against her mind. She gasped, nearly pulling away, but his grip tightened. Stay with me, he murmured. Speak your truth. Elena forced herself to breathe, to focus. I bind myself to you because I choose to. Not from compulsion, not from fear, but because her voice cracked. Because you make me feel brave. Because you see the broken parts of me and don't look away. Because Lily deserves a world where monsters can choose to be kind. Through their joined hands, she felt his emotions surge: gratitude, wonder, something deeper that made her heart race. Your turn, she whispered. Dorian's eyes held hers, and she saw every defense crumble. I bind myself to you because I'm tired of being alone. Because your courage shames my cowardice. Because he stopped, struggling. Because from the moment you walked through that door, bloody and brave and absolutely mortal, I wanted to keep you, to protect you. To his voice broke. To love you, if you'll let me. The admission hung between them. Raw and honest and terrifying. Chapter 8. The bond complete. Elena's world exploded into sensation. The moment Dorian spoke those final words, the blood bond ignited. It wasn't gentle, it was a flood, a torrent, 2 centuries of memories and emotions pouring into her consciousness like water through a broken dam. She gasped, her grip on his hands tightening until her knuckles went white. She saw everything. A young man in 1823, walking home through London fog, feeling the presence behind him. Too late. The attack brutal, terrifying, his humanity ripped away without consent. She felt his rage, his grief, his desperate attempt to cling to the morality his mother had taught him, even as his new sire laughed and called him weak. Years of hunting with that sire, forced to watch as humans were treated as prey, as entertainment. The night Dorian finally rebelled, driving a stake through the heart of the monster who'd made him, while tears streaked down his face. Not from regret, but from the terrible knowledge that he'd become exactly what he'd feared, a killer. 2 centuries of loneliness followed, of building Thornwood territory stone by stone, trying to create something better, of every vampire he'd killed to protect the innocent, justified or not, of the weight of lives saved and lives taken, of the impossible mathematics of being a monster who tried to do good, and beneath it all, woven through every memory, the crushing, devastating loneliness, the knowledge that he would never be accepted by humans or vampires, would spend eternity caught between two worlds, belonging to neither, until 3 months ago, when a woman with bruises on her wrists and fire in her eyes had knocked on his door, asking for sanctuary. Elena saw herself through his eyes, small, wounded, fierce, saw how he'd noticed the way she flinched from sudden movements, recognized the signs of abuse in the careful way she held herself, saw his immediate, overwhelming need to protect her, to give her the safety no one had given him. And she saw the moment he'd begun to fall in love. Not when she'd saved him with her blood that had been gratitude. No, it was later, during one of those early mornings when she'd been cleaning the hall. She'd been humming to herself, unaware he was watching. And the sound had been so purely alive, so human and warm and real that something in his chest had cracked open after 200 years of being frozen. The memories shifted, became more recent. His careful avoidance of her, because being near her hurt, a reminder of everything he could never have. His terror when House Corvinus attacked, when he'd thought she might be caught in the crossfire. The way her blood had tasted that first night, not just of copper and life, but of courage and determination and stubborn hope. And now, kneeling before her, his truth laid bare, he loved her, completely, desperately, in a way that terrified him, because love made you vulnerable, made you weak, made you human in all the ways that got you killed. Elena came back to herself with a sob, tears streaming down her face. But she didn't pull away. Instead, she felt her own memories beginning to flow in reverse into him, through their joined hands, an equal exchange. He saw her childhood, relatively happy until her father died. Her mother's descent into depression, the responsibility of caring for a parent when she was barely 16. Meeting David in college, believing his intensity was passion rather than the warning sign it was. The first time he'd hit her, the shock of it, the way he'd apologized and sworn it would never happen again, but it did happen again, and again, each time followed by flowers, by tears, by promises that became worthless as air. Elena had stayed because she'd had nowhere to go, because he'd isolated her from friends and family, because she'd started to believe his words that she was worthless, that no one else would want her, that she deserved his anger. Then Lily had been born, and something fundamental had shifted. Elena could endure for herself, but not for her daughter. The day she'd seen David raise his hand toward their child, she'd grabbed Lily and run. No plan, no money, just desperation and a mother's fury. 3 months of running, of shelters and cheap motels, of watching over her shoulder, until she'd seen the advertisement for Thornwood Castle, promising safety and discretion. She'd known it was strange, had suspected something wasn't quite right about an employer who only worked at night. But strange was better than David's fists. Strange was better than fear. And then she'd met Dorian, wounded, dying, trying to send her away even as his life bled out. In that moment, she'd recognized something in him. Not a predator, but another survivor. Someone who understood what it meant to be broken and still choose kindness. The memory shifted to more recent days. Her growing awareness of him, the way her pulse quickened when he entered a room. The confusing tangle of attraction and fear, wanting and uncertainty. She'd sworn off men, sworn off vulnerability. But Dorian wasn't just a man, he was something other. Something that made her feel safe in ways she'd forgotten were possible. And despite every vow she'd made to protect her heart, she'd started to fall. Not because he was beautiful or powerful, but because he was good. Because he tried so desperately hard to be more than his nature. And that striving, that refusal to accept the easy path of cruelty had stolen past every defense she'd built. The memories faded, leaving them kneeling in the circle, hands pressed together, both trembling from the intensity of what they'd shared. The candles flickered, and Elena felt the magic settle around them like a weight, like wings, like chains made of starlight. "I see you," Dorian whispered, his voice raw. "God, Elena, I see all of you." And he stopped, overcome. "I see you too." Elena's tears fell freely now. "Every century, every choice, every moment, you chose mercy over cruelty. You're not a monster, Dorian. You never were. I've killed to protect, to save. Never for pleasure, never without regret." She shifted their hands, threading her fingers through his. "I saw your guilt. I felt it. You carry the weight of every life you've taken, justified or not. That's not monstrous. That's human." He laughed, broken and wet. "I haven't been human in 200 years. Then we'll redefine human." Elena leaned forward, their foreheads almost touching. "We'll make it mean choosing kindness even when it's hard. Choosing to protect the vulnerable. Choosing love over loneliness." Elena, her name was a prayer, a question, a surrender. She closed the distance between them, pressing her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative to people who'd been broken learning how to be whole together. But then Dorian made a sound low in his throat, and his free hand came up to cup her face with devastating tenderness. The kiss deepened, became something hungry and desperate and absolutely right. Through the bond, Elena felt everything. He felt his longing, his wonder, his fear of hurting her mixed with the overwhelming need to be closer. And he felt her in return, felt her desire and her trust. And the way she'd chosen him, despite knowing every dark corner of his past. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard even though only one of them needed to, the candles had burned low. The circle of salt and silver glowed faintly, the magic sealing their bond into something permanent and unbreakable. "It's done," Dorian said quietly, turning their joined hands to study where their palms pressed together. The cuts had healed, leaving matching scars that looked like silver threads beneath their skin. "You're mine, and I'm yours. Until death." "Good." Elena touched his face, tracing the sharp line of his jaw. "Because I'm not letting House Corvinus take you from me." Something fierce flashed in his eyes. "Or you from me. Anyone who tries to hurt you will learn exactly how monstrous I can be, protective and possessive." Should I be concerned? Probably. His smile was dangerous and beautiful. "But you knew what you were signing up for." Elena laughed, the sound bright in the heavy air. "I really didn't. But I don't regret it. You will, eventually." But his tone was light, teasing. And through the bond she felt his joy, fragile and new and desperately precious. They helped each other stand, neither willing to break contact just yet. The bond thrummed between them, warm and steady, and Elena could feel Dorian's presence in her mind now like a second heartbeat. Not intrusive, just there, a constant reminder that she wasn't alone. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now?" Dorian's expression hardened, the warrior returning. "Now we make sure every vampire in the territory knows about our bond. Make it impossible for Corvinus to claim ignorance when he attacks." He pulled her closer, protective and possessive in equal measure. "And then we set our trap, the bait plan, with modifications. Now that we're properly bound, harming you would violate sacred law. Corvinus will have to be more careful, which gives us advantages." He was already thinking, planning, that brilliant strategic mind working through possibilities. "We'll leak information that you're vulnerable. Make him think he can take you without consequence. And when he comes for me, I'll be waiting." Dorian's eyes flashed red for just a moment, predator emerging. "Along with every ally I can convince to stand with us. It's time to stop hiding, Elena. Time to show House Corvinus and the Night Court that there's a different way to be vampire." Elena felt his determination through the bond, saw the shape of what he was planning. It was dangerous, possibly suicidal, but it was also their only real chance. "When do we start?" "Tomorrow night. We'll attend the blood market in the neutral territory. It's where vampires gather to trade information and power. Our bond will be obvious to everyone there." His hand tightened on hers. "Corvinus will see it as provocation. Let him." Elena's jaw set with determination. She'd learned from 3 months of running, from 4 years of surviving her marriage. "I'm done being afraid of bullies." Dorian's smile was proud and feral. That's my girl. The possessive phrase should have bothered her. Instead, it sent warmth flooding through her chest. They left the circle together, blowing out candles and breaking the salt line. But the magic remained, woven into their very beings. Now, Elena could feel Dorian in the back of her mind, his presence, his emotions, his steady certainty, and for the first time since she'd fled her marriage, she felt truly safe, not because she was protected, but because she had a partner. Someone who saw her completely and chose her anyway. Tomorrow they would go to war, but tonight, they had each other. It would be enough. It had to be. Chapter 9. Into the Lion's Den. Blood Market occupied neutral ground, an abandoned cathedral on the border between territories, its Gothic spires reaching toward a moonless sky. Elena stood beside Dorian in the shadow of an ancient oak, watching carriages and sleek modern cars arrive in equal measure. Vampires didn't abandon their aesthetic easily, remember, Dorian said quietly, his hand warm against the small of her back. Don't make eye contact unless you're prepared to challenge. Don't accept any offers of food or drink. And stay close to me. You've told me 3 times. Elena adjusted the dress he'd given her, deep burgundy silk that looked medieval and modern at once. Mrs. Calloway had helped her with her hair, pulling it up to expose the bond marks on her neck. Let them see. Let them know. Through their connection, she felt Dorian's anxiety spike. I'm serious, Elena. These aren't the vampires who pretend to be human. These are the old ones, the ones who remember when we ruled openly. They're dangerous. So are we. She squeezed his hand, feeling the matching scars on their palms pulse with warmth. Together, remember? His expression softened, and he lifted her hand to his lips, kissing the scarred palm. The gesture was tender and possessive, and Elena felt several pairs of eyes track the movement from the cathedral steps. They're already watching, she murmured. Good. Let them watch. Dorian kept her hand in his as they walked toward the entrance. Let them see exactly what they're dealing with. The cathedral's interior had been transformed. Candles floated in midair, actual magic, Elena realized with a jolt, casting everything in flickering gold. The pews had been removed, replaced by scattered furniture that looked salvaged from different centuries. Vampires occupied every shadowed corner, some in period costume, others in designer suits. All of them turned to look when Dorian entered. The silence was deafening. Elena felt their scrutiny like physical touch, dozens of predatory gazes assessing her, cataloging weaknesses. Her pulse jumped, and she heard several vampires inhale sharply, sending her fear. Through the bond, Dorian's protective instincts flared hot and immediate. Thornwood, a vampire, emerged from the crowd, male, ancient by the power rolling off him, dressed in a Victorian coat that had probably been fashionable when it was new. How unexpected. We heard rumors you'd finally been eliminated. Disappointed, Marcus? Dorian's tone was pleasant, but Elena felt the tension coiling in him. Or did you have money on Corvinus succeeding? Marcus's smile showed to many teeth. I never bet against inevitability. House Corvinus has been circling for months. It's only a matter of. He stopped, his gaze finally landing on Elena, on the bond marks visible at her throat, on their joined hands. His expression shifted from amusement to shock. You didn't. I did. Dorian pulled Elena closer, a clear statement of ownership and protection. Elena Reyes, bound to me by blood oath, recognized under ancient law as part of House Thornwood. The reaction was immediate. Vampires surged forward, voices rising in a cacophony of disbelief and outrage. Elena forced herself to stand steady, to meet their stares without flinching. She felt Dorian's pride pulse through their connection. A blood oath? With a human? A female vampire pushed through the crowd, her eyes blazing. That's sacrilege, Thornwood. A mockery of our traditions. Our traditions are built on consent, Dorian shot back. Or have you forgotten that blood oaths require willing participation from both parties? His voice carried across the cathedral. Elena chose this. Chose me. Can any of you say the same about your thralls? The silence that followed was poisonous. Elena saw several vampires exchange glances, uncomfortable truths hitting too close. Bold words. Came a new voice, smooth and dangerous. The crowd parted, and Elena's breath caught. Lord Corvinus himself was beautiful in the way poisonous things were, pale as death, dark-haired, with eyes like chips of obsidian. He wore a modern suit worth more than Elena's car had been, and moved with the casual confidence of someone who'd never known defeat. Celeste walked 2 steps behind him, her burned face now healed, her expression hungry. Dorian Thornwood. Corvinus smiled, and it was like watching a snake prepare to strike. Still clinging to your delusions of vampire morality, I see. And now you've dragged a human into your fantasy. Elena is under my protection. Bound by oath, Dorian's voice was steel. Harming her would violate sacred law. Even you can't ignore that, Corvinus. Can I? Corvinus circled them slowly, a predator assessing prey. Sacred law applies to equals, Thornwood. You're an outcast, a sire killer. The Night Court stripped your status decades ago. What makes you think your blood oath holds any weight? Elena felt Dorian's shock through the bond, quickly masked. He hadn't known, hadn't realized his exile had invalidated his ability to form recognized bonds, which meant she wasn't protected. Not legally. Corvinus saw the realization hit and laughed. Oh, this is delicious. You thought binding her would keep her safe, didn't you? Thought I'd have to honor vampire law and leave her alone. He stopped directly in front of Elena, so close she could smell death on him like expensive cologne. But she's not protected, little Thornwood. She's just marked. Just pray wearing a sign that says she belongs to you. Touch her and die. Dorian's voice dropped to something inhuman, and Elena felt his control fracturing. Empty threats. You're outnumbered here, outmatched. Corvinus reached toward Elena's face. She moved without thinking, grabbing the silver knife hidden in her dress and slashing across his extended hand. The blade bit deep, and Corvinus jerked back with a hiss of pain and surprise. I belong to myself, Elena said, her voice steady despite her hammering heart. The bond was my choice. Staying is my choice. And if you think I'll stand here while you threaten my family, you're about to learn exactly how dangerous desperate humans can be. For 3 heartbeats, no one moved. Then Corvinus threw back his head and laughed, genuine, delighted laughter that was somehow more terrifying than his anger. Oh, I like her. He examined his hand, watching the silver burn heal slowly. She has teeth. Tell me, Dorian, does she taste as fierce as she acts? Careful. The word was a growl. Or what? You'll challenge me here, in neutral territory, in front of witnesses? Corvinus spread his hands, the picture of innocence. That would be suicide, and we both know it. Then why are we here? Elena demanded, surprising herself. She felt Dorian's alarm through the bond, but pushed forward anyway. You've been circling Thornwood territory for months, sending assassins, planting thralls. If you want his land so badly, why not just challenge him openly? Corvinus's amusement faded. Because I don't want just his territory, little human. I want him broken. I want him to watch everything he's built crumble. I want him to understand that mercy is weakness, that his precious morality is a joke. His eyes glittered with ancient malice. I want him to suffer before he dies. Why? The question came from Dorian, raw and confused. What did I ever do to you, Corvinus? I've stayed in my territory, honored the borders. You exist. The shout echoed through the cathedral. You exist as proof that vampires can choose to be weak, can choose to grovel before humans instead of ruling them. Every day you survive is an insult to everything we are. Corvinus's facade of civility shattered. Your sire was right to force immortality on you. Your only mistake was being too cowardly to embrace it. The pieces clicked into place. Elena felt Dorian's shock mirror her own as understanding hit. You knew him, Dorian whispered. My sire. You knew him. He was my brother. Corvinus's smile was venomous. And you murdered him for trying to teach you the truth that humans exist to serve us. So yes, Thornwood, I want you broken. I want you to watch this, human. You've bound yourself to die slowly. I want you to feel every moment of her suffering before I finally grant you the death you've been too proud to accept. The threat hung in the air, absolute and certain. Around them, the gathered vampires had gone silent, understanding they were witnessing something beyond normal house politics. This was personal. This was revenge to centuries in the making. Then come for us, Elena said, her voice cutting through the tension. Stop hiding behind assassins and ambush. Face us like you claim vampires should with strength and honor. Unless you're afraid. Corvinus's eyes snapped to her, red, bleeding into the black. Careful, little human. That tongue of yours will get you killed, probably. Elena felt Dorian's terror through the bond, but refused to back down. But I'd rather die on my feet than live on my knees. That's something your brother never understood about humans. We're stronger than you think. For a moment, she thought Corvinus would strike, would kill her right there. despite neutral ground and witnesses. His hand rose, claws extending enough. The voice came from the cathedral's entrance, and every vampire in the room froze. A figure stepped from the shadows, female, impossibly old, wearing robes that predated the Roman Empire. Her eyes were solid white, no iris or pupil, and power radiated from her like heat from a furnace. Magistrate Ophelia, Corvinus said, and for the first time Elena heard uncertainty in his voice. This doesn't concern the Night Court, doesn't it? The ancient vampire glided forward, and Elena noticed the floor itself seemed to move out of her way. A blood oath between vampire and human, formed in good faith. Threats of violence on neutral ground. And you, Corvinus, revealing your vendetta stems from personal revenge rather than territorial dispute. She turned those unsettling white eyes toward Dorian. It seems the Night Court has much to discuss. Dorian bowed, pulling Elena down with him. Magistrate, we seek only to defend what's ours. Do you? Ophelia studied them both, her gaze lingering on their joined hands. A blood oath requires complete honesty, Thornwood. Did you tell her everything? Including what loving a vampire truly costs. Through the bond, Elena felt Dorian's fear spike. I told her everything I could. Then you're either a liar or a fool. Ophelia's expression was unreadable. Blood oaths don't just bind, they transform. In time, your human will begin to change, Thornwood. The bond will either make her more than human or destroy her. There is no middle ground. Elena's world tilted. Dorian's hand tightened on hers, his guilt crashing through their connection like waves. He hadn't known. Or worse, he'd suspected and hoped she wouldn't ask. Chapter 10. The choice that changes everything. Ride back to Thornwood Castle was silent except for the rain hammering against the carriage windows. Dorian sat across from Elena rather than beside her, his face turned toward the darkness outside. Through the bond, she felt his guilt like acid, eating away at him with every passing mile. Say something, she finally said. What is there to say? His voice was hollow. Ophelia was right. I didn't tell you everything because I didn't know everything. Or I convinced myself I didn't. He finally looked at her, and his eyes were devastated. The bond will change you, Elena. Make you stronger, faster, give you some of my abilities. But it will also make you not quite human anymore. Yes, the word was barely a whisper. And I bound you to me without fully understanding the cost. I'm no better than my sire, forcing transformation without true consent. Elena sat with that for a moment, feeling the weight of it. Her humanity, her mortality, the things that made her who she was would slowly slip away, replaced by something other. Not vampire, but not entirely human either. A creature caught between worlds, just like Dorian himself. She should have been furious, should have felt betrayed. Instead, she felt oddly calm. Did you know about my ex-husband's violence when you hired me? She asked. The question seemed to confuse him. I suspected. The way you flinched, the fading bruises. Why? You didn't know for certain. But you gave me a job anyway. Gave me safety, gave Lily a home. Elena leaned forward. You took a risk on me without knowing everything. Maybe I'm returning the favor. That's different, is it? She held his gaze. You're terrified I'll hate what I become, that I'll blame you for changing me. But Dorian, I was already changed. David changed me, made me afraid, made me small, made me forget I was strong. Her hand went to her neck, to the bond marks. You're helping me remember. By making you into a monster. No, by making me into a survivor. Elena moved to sit beside him, taking his hand. Ophelia said the bond would either transform me or destroy me. She didn't say which one was more likely, because it depends on the strength of the human. Dorian's thumb traced circles on her palm. Some can't handle the change. Their minds break, or their bodies reject the transformation. They die slowly in agony, and the ones who survive become something extraordinary. Vampire hunters, some of them, protectors of the boundary between worlds, living longer than humans should, healing faster, seeing in darkness. He paused, but never fully belonging to either species, always caught between, like you, Elena said softly, like me. His smile was sad. Except you didn't ask for this. You saved my life, and I repaid you by stealing your humanity. You offered me a choice. I took it. Elena shifted closer, and his arm came around her automatically, pulling her against his side. I knew the bond was permanent. I knew it would change things between us. Maybe I didn't know the specifics, but I understood the weight of what I was choosing. You're being far too generous. I'm being honest. She tilted her head to look at him. When we formed the bond, I saw everything, remember? Every memory, every choice, every moment of your existence. I saw the humans you've accidentally hurt while learning control. I saw the ones you couldn't save. I saw all of it, and I still chose you. Through the bond, she felt something crack in him, the careful control he'd maintained since leaving the blood market finally breaking apart. His arms tightened around her, and she felt him shaking. I can't lose you, he whispered against her hair. Not to Corvinus, not to the transformation, not to anything. Elena, I've spent 2 centuries alone, and 3 months knowing you has made me more human than 200 years of trying. If you die, if you suffer because of me, then we'll deal with it, together. Elena pulled back enough to frame his face with her hands. But I'm not planning on dying. I'm planning on fighting. For you, for Lily, for every person in Thornwood territory who deserves to live without fear. Her jaw set with determination. Corvinus wants to break you? Let him try. He'll find out exactly how stubborn, desperate humans can be. Dorian stared at her, and slowly, impossibly, he began to smile. You're insane, probably. I bound myself to a vampire after all. Elena smiled back. But we have advantages now. Ophelia knows Corvinus's vendetta is personal. The Night Court will be watching. And every vampire at the blood market saw our bond, saw me stand up to him. Some of them looked interested. Interested in what? In the possibility that you're not alone. That there might be other vampires tired of the old ways, looking for a different path. Elena's mind raced, pieces falling into place. You said there were rumors of younger vampires questioning tradition. What if we gave them something to rally around? Dorian's expression shifted from grief to calculation. You want to start a revolution. I want to survive. If that means challenging the way vampires have operated for centuries, then yes. She held his gaze. You've been fighting alone because you thought you had to, but tonight proved otherwise. Marcus looked uncomfortable when you mentioned consent. That female vampire flinched when you called out their thralls. Even some of Corvinus's people seemed unsettled by how personal his hatred is. They were unsettled by a human defying one of the oldest lords. Good. Let them be unsettled. Elena's smile turned sharp. Fear works both ways. If House Corvinus can terrorize your territory, we can make them afraid, too. Through the bond, she felt Dorian's emotions shift from despair to hope to something fiercer. Something that felt like belief. You really think we can win this? He asked quietly. I think we can survive it. And for people like us, survival is winning. Elena leaned her forehead against his. I survived 4 years of marriage to a man who wanted to destroy me. You survived 2 centuries of being told you were wrong for having mercy. We're both experts at enduring, but you said you were tired of just surviving. I am. Which is why we're going to do more than endure. She kissed him, soft and certain. We're going to live, Dorian. Really? Live. Fight when we have to, love when we can, and build something worth protecting. The carriage rolled to a stop outside Thornwood Castle. Through the windows, Elena could see lights burning in every window. Mrs. Calloway and the other servants keeping watch. Keeping safe the sanctuary Dorian had built. They're waiting for us, she said. They always are. Dorian helped her down from the carriage, his hand steady on hers. Elena, if the transformation becomes too much, if you start to feel yourself slipping, I'll tell you. And you'll help me through it. She squeezed his hand. That's what partners do, remember? He pulled her close, kissing her with an intensity that stole her breath. Through the bond, she felt everything he couldn't say, his love, his fear, his desperate hope that somehow, against all odds, they would survive what was coming. When they finally broke apart, Mrs. Calloway was waiting at the door, her expression grim. House Corvinus sent a messenger, she said, without preamble. They're demanding a formal challenge. 3 nights from now, on neutral ground. Single combat, Lord Corvinus against Lord Thornwood. Her eyes flicked to Elena. Winner takes all territories, all holdings, and she paused. And all humans under protection. Elena felt ice flood her veins. He's using the Night Court's rules, making it legal, making it impossible to refuse, Dorian confirmed. His jaw was set, but through the bond she felt his terror. Not for himself, for her, for Lily, for everyone depending on him. If I decline, I'm branded a coward, and my territory becomes forfeit anyway. Then you accept. Elena's voice was steady despite her racing heart. And we spend the next 3 nights preparing. Elena, Corvinus is ancient, Powerful. He survived for over 500 years by being absolutely ruthless. Dorian's hands framed her face. I might not win. Then we make sure you do. She turned to Mrs. Calloway. How many staff know what Lord Thornwood is? How many would fight for him? The housekeeper's smile was fierce. Every one of us. We've all been given safety here when the world outside had none to offer. If it comes to war, Thornwood doesn't stand alone. It won't come to war. Not if we're smart. Elena's mind was already racing ahead, forming plans, considering angles. Corvinus wants a duel? Fine, but duels have rules and rules can be used as weapons. She looked at Dorian. You said you've killed vampires for 200 years. Teach me how. Teach everyone who'll learn. Because if he wants to take our home, he'll have to go through all of us. Dorian stared at her, and through the bond she felt the moment his despair transformed into something else. Something like hope. 3 nights, he said quietly. We train for 3 nights, and then we show House Corvinus what happens when you underestimate survivors. Elena took his hand, feeling the bond mark pulse warm beneath their joined palms. Together, he echoed. They walked into the castle side by side, ready to prepare for war. Behind them, the rain continued to fall, washing away the old world to make room for something new. Elena felt the first stirrings of change in her blood, the bond beginning its work, making her into something more than human, something strong enough to stand beside a vampire and call him equal. It should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like coming home. 3 nights until the duel. 3 nights to prepare for a fight that would determine not just their survival, but the future of every human and vampire in Thornwood territory. 3 nights to prove that love and choice and stubborn hope could stand against centuries of cruelty. It would have to be enough. As they climbed the stairs together, Dorian's hand warm in hers, despite his immortal cold. Elena allowed herself one moment of certainty. Whatever happened in 3 nights, whatever the cost, she would not regret choosing him. Some bonds were worth fighting for, some loves were worth transforming for, and some battles, win or lose, were worth fighting simply because refusing to fight meant accepting a world where monsters like Corvinus made the rules. Elena Reyes had spent too long letting others control her story. Now, bound to a vampire who believed in mercy, standing at the edge of war, she was finally ready to write her own ending. The end.